It's August 2024, and the Korean entertainment industry is reeling from a confession that feels less like a celebrity announcement and more like a betrayal of the very concept of reality TV. Ham So-won, the actress who had spent years curating an image of domestic bliss with her much younger husband, Jin Hwa, stepped forward to admit what many had suspected but few dared to say out loud. The fairy tale was a lie. For 2 years, the couple had been legally divorced, yet they continued to live under the same roof, filming smiles and shared meals for the reality show Taste of a Wife. It wasn't just a ratings stunt, it was a calculated performance that duped fans and viewers into investing emotionally in a union that had already crumbled. The irony here is suffocating. When Ham So-won won the Miss Korea crown back in 1997, Jin Hwa was a toddler, only 3 years old. For years, critics and internet trolls had taken cheap shots, labeling them a mother and son duo due to their 18-year age gap. They fought against that narrative, or so we thought. They got married, they had a daughter, and they invited cameras into their home to prove the haters wrong. But looking back now, you have to wonder if the pressure of that generational gap didn't eventually crack the foundation. The timeline is messy, and frankly, it feels manipulative. They met, sparks flew, or so the story goes, and a young Chinese blogger proposed just 3 months after crossing paths. It was whirlwind, it was romantic, and it was perfect for television. But behind the scenes, the reality was far harsher. They announced their separation in 2024, but the bombshell was that the marriage had actually ended in 2022. For 2 entire years, they pretended to be a happy family. They insist the deception was for the sake of their young daughter, a desire to shield her from the fallout until she was old enough to understand. On paper, that sounds like noble parenting. In practice, it means they gaslit an entire audience. Watching old episodes of their show now leaves a bad taste in your mouth, knowing the arguments were likely real, but the makeup scenes were just acting. Today, they claim to be friendly strangers co-parenting, but the illusion is shattered forever. It forces you to ask, how much of what we see in these variety shows is actually real? If a marriage can die and still be kept on life support for the cameras, what else are we watching that's just smoke and mirrors? This obsession with age and the perfect narrative isn't isolated to one couple, though. It's a systemic issue in an industry that prides itself on conservative values while feeding on scandal. Take the case of Eli Kim and Ji Yeon-soo, a story that doesn't have a happy ending either, but for entirely different reasons. Back in 2014, Eli was riding high as a member of UKIS. He was an idol in the truest sense, contracted to be perfect, available, and ostensibly single. So when he dropped the news that he wasn't just married, but had been secretly married for a while and was already a father, the backlash was immediate and brutal. The age gap here was 11 years, Ji Yeon-soo being the older party. But the controversy wasn't just about the numbers. It was about the betrayal of the idol contract, the unspoken rule that fans own a piece of your romantic life until the company says otherwise. Eli didn't just step out of line, he erased it. He hid his marriage, he hid the pregnancy, and he essentially gambled his entire career for the sake of his family. They eventually held a wedding ceremony 3 years after the fact, trying to smooth things over, but the damage was done. The industry never really forgave him for disrupting the status quo. By November 2020, the fairy tale collapsed for good. Eli announced he was moving to the United States, leaving his ex-wife and son behind in Korea. It was a messy, public unraveling. 2 years later, in a desperate attempt to fix things, or perhaps just to chase one last moment of relevance, they appeared on the show We Got Divorced. If you watched those episodes, you didn't see a reunion. You saw 2 people who had hurt each other too deeply to find their way back. The recriminations were raw, the silence was heavy, and the miracle everyone hoped for never happened. It proved that sometimes fighting for love against the world isn't enough to save it from itself. When the pressure finally lifted, there was nothing left to hold the relationship together. But it's not all cynicism and failed contracts. Every once in a while, you see a story that cuts through the noise and reminds you why people bother risking everything for love in the first place. The saga of Mina and Ryu Philippe is the emotional counterweight to the Ham So-won scandal. Here, the 17-year age difference wasn't a gimmick, it was a crucible. When Ryu Philippe, a young singer, first laid eyes on Mina at a party, he didn't see a gap. He just saw the woman of his dreams. He didn't know her age, and frankly, he didn't care. They married in 2018, looking like they had it all, but behind the closed doors, they were fighting a war that no reality show camera could capture. They wanted children, but biology is cruel and indifferent to love. Years of examinations, painful IVF procedures, and the emotional roller coaster of hope and despair took its toll. When the doctors finally gave the verdict that Mina, likely due to her age and health, could not conceive, it wasn't just a medical diagnosis. diagnosis. It felt like a sentence. What happened next is where this story separates itself from the usual tabloid fodder. Mina, carrying the weight of guilt that so many women in her position feel, did the unthinkable. She offered Ryu Philippe a divorce. She was willing to destroy her own happiness, to step aside and let him find a younger woman who could give him the heir he presumably wanted. That is a level of self-sacrifice that you rarely see in this selfish, image-obsessed industry. But Ryu Philippe's response shut down every cynical critic in the comments section. He refused. He didn't hesitate. He made it clear that his family was Mina, not a hypothetical child. He chose the woman over the legacy. They are still together, not because they have to be for a contract, but because they actually want to be. In a world of arranged relationships and PR dating scandals, their bond feels like the only real thing left. And then, just when you think the industry is cursed, you get a story that feels like a balm for the soul. Shin and Kim Woo-bin. Their recent wedding on December 20th, 2025 at the Shilla Hotel wasn't just a celebrity event. It was a victory lap for survival. The 5-year age difference between them was the least of their worries. They met in 2015, and right when their relationship was blossoming, life threw a curveball that would have broken most couples. Kim Woo-bin, young, successful, and unstoppable, was diagnosed with nasopharyngeal cancer. Suddenly, red carpets and script readings were replaced with hospital rooms and treatment plans. Most fair-weather relationships would have crumbled under that kind of pressure. The uncertainty, the physical toll, the sheer fear, it's too much for many. But Shin didn't flinch. She didn't just stand by him. She put her own career on hold. She disappeared from the limelight, not to hide, but to be his rock. She became his support system through the grueling treatments. And when he finally won his battle against cancer, she was still there. 10 years later, walking down that aisle, they weren't just celebrating a marriage. They were celebrating life. It wasn't a performance for the cameras. It was a quiet testament to the vow in sickness and in health. Watching them now, you realize that for some, the spotlight isn't a cage. It's just a backdrop to something genuine. Rounding out this chaotic landscape is the royal couple, Kim Tae-hee and Rain. Their story is the stuff of K-drama legends, minus the tragedy. With only a 2-year age difference, the controversy here wasn't about generational gaps, but about the sheer tenacity of Rain's pursuit. When Rain, a global superstar, first saw Kim Tae-hee on set in 2011, he was smitten. But she wasn't easily impressed. She was a goddess in the industry, and his fame didn't automatically grant him access to her heart. He spent a year chasing her, facing rejection after rejection, refusing to take the hint. In an industry where relationships are often transactional or secretive, Rain's old-school stubborn pursuit was refreshing. They married in 2017, and unlike the couples who used their personal lives for content, they retreated. They built a fortress around their private life. Today, they have 2 daughters they keep hidden from the piranhas of the press. While others are divorcing and leaking stories to the press, Kim Tae-hee and Rain are just happy. It's boring in the best possible way. They prove that you don't need to scream your love from the rooftops to make it real.